hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me.
When we think of our life with the Messiah, what comes to mind?
Well, we should recognize that he is our life. Without him, we were dead in our trespasses and sins. We have the foretaste of the blessings. We have fellowship. We have just the joy, a heart that loves the scripture.
All because of Messiah?
What's that?
All because of Messiah?
All because of Messiah.
Yeshua, Messiah, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, yo. It is Wednesday, March 13th, 2019. This is Messiah Matters number 257. Just when I was getting used to room service, I had to come back. My name is Caleb Haig.
And I found my passport. I'm Rob Hanhoff.
Yes. Awesome. So
Israel does not stamp your passport. They
What?
give you they give you a little tag.
they stamped mine.
Did they? Well, they changed their policy.
I haven't been there in 20
But that
years.
was what,
so-
40 years ago?
Yikes. Oh, harsh, dude.
Dude, you and I are drinking from the same rock right now. What's in yours?
Coffee.
Water.
So Rob is preparing to go to Israel.
Whoop, whoop.
And new kicker. We got a new executive producer kicker. So he's preparing to go to Israel. He's going to give this lecture on manuscripts, formation of manuscripts. And as is the custom of anyone that's going to present a paper, your mind is just totally immersed in all things manuscript related.
Yes, this is true.
So that's always fun. And but there's more news on that front. We've decided that Rob should give his findings before he goes over to Israel. And so for a mere $10, you can get a digital ticket to the online event that will be on, when is it? I should know this.
March 28th, Thursday,
March
5 p.m.
28th.
Pacific Daylight Savings,
Yes.
or whatever we're called right now. Hey, just to clarify,
Clarify away.
this is going to be what we're called this a brief history of Hebrew Bible manuscripts. So it's going to be more general than my paper will be really way more specific than what this.
You had to make it for the common person. I've told this story.
It's a big picture kind of thing.
I've told this story on this show before. But
It's like we're hang gliding through the Andes.
I'm going to tell it again anyway. We go to the SBL, and Rob is presenting two papers. He presents in the Missouri section, which it's always above my head, so I don't even attempt anymore. I just there was other things going on. I wasn't going to go to that, but I wanted to
Greco-Roman meals, baby. See if it's about food, Caleb will be there.
Exactly, dude. There's
Or ancient brewing techniques.
Ben in my small group, he always says that his favorite verse is I think it's in 2 Samuel where it talks about they brought 10 cheeses. Anyway, so Rob's going to give another paper at the SBL, and I'm like, oh yeah, the Midrash section. Okay, I can get behind this. This will be good. So I go in, I sit down. Rob gets up, and I'm just in time. Oh, what's happening? Sorry about that, guys. Anyway, Rob gets up, and he's about to. He starts giving his presentation. Now, within the first 45 seconds, Rob has completely lost me. I have no clue what in the world he's talking about. And I'm trying to catch back up and figure out what in the world he's, and he's showing all these slides and just it's like words are coming out of his mouth, but it's like he's speaking Japanese. I know nothing of what he's saying. And so after
Caleb, because I don't remember a word I said either.
After a half an hour or so, of Rob talking, and I never caught back up. He lost me in the first 45 seconds. I have to this day, I have no clue what he was talking about. Anyway, I'm thinking to myself, well, you know, that was interesting. It was a bit dry, you know, and I wonder what the reception's going to be, you know. And no offense to you, Rob, but I thought, you know, well, is this really what these people were looking for? Like, did anyone understand what in the world was going on? And then it was hailed as like one of the greatest papers in the section, which shows my stupidity, because everyone else was like, oh my word, that's the most fascinating thing. We're going to publish that. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're publishing it because it was so good. And here I am, the monkey sitting in the corner who can't comprehend the words that have just been spoken.
Well, it's a field thing, right? It's like baseball. Like you go to a baseball game. Like if I go to a baseball game with friends that are like totally into it, they'll be using lingo, and I'm like, okay, can you explain like what's a designated hitter? What can you explain? Like,
yeah.
Now, what's the difference between the American League and the, you know what I mean? It's like,
so I assume that Rob's paper in Israel is going to be about the same. However, I have explained to Rob that he needs to dumb it down for the monkey sitting in the corner, myself, and I believe this is what we will be getting on the 28th.
Yeah.
So it should be very good, and I'm excited for it. Yeah. You want to say anything else? Go to Torah Resource. Go to Torah Resource.
yeah, Mike has a nice link up.
Yeah, looks great.
And I think an email went out this morning too.
Right.
Abroad to our mailing list. So
right. So go get your ticket now, $10. And
you'll get basically something I could share. So you want to have a good screen if you want to be able to kind of see the manuscripts, because there's a lot of heavy visual element to this. But all the images, I think the vast majority, if not all, of the manuscript images will be pulled from live libraries like British Library, etc. And I'll have links for all those so people can go and follow up on those later if they like.
And for those in the chat room, Mike just put it in the chat room. So I'll link to it in the chat room.
And this is cool for another reason, Caleb, is because we've wanted to do webinars like this.
Right.
Like an evening,
an
evening with a chat, the fireside chat, with the pipe,
Get your bubble pipe. Yeah. Okay.
With a book, and a little crackling fire in the background.
So one of the things that happens when I set up for the show is that I bring in an extra keyboard and I set it up, and then because my normal keyboard is pushed in a different location, I think one of my cords is going bad, my mouse never works. So if you see me continue to fidget with something, it's so that I can move my cursor, because all of a sudden I don't have the ability. Okay, here we go. Let's say this. Give us a call, 253-465-3205. It's 253-465-3205. You can also send us an email. And these are actually really important. sehat@torahresource.com. Our email is actually and the comment line are a very big part of the show. And this past week, on Monday, when we sat down to look at what we were going to talk about, we had nothing. Basically, the book that I had that was full of weeks and weeks of content has been, we've pillaged it for content. And so basically we scratched our heads and said, what are we going to talk about? Now, we probably have a full show here, but nonetheless. But even yesterday in the morning, we were saying, okay, what are we going to talk about? Now, that's on us. We've been doing this for 5 or 6 years now. I think it's 6 years. And so, we've continued to come up with content for 257 shows. Maybe not the greatest content, but it is content.
Depends on who you ask on some of those. I think.
Yeah, sehat@torahresource.com, though. Whether it's a large question, a small question, a huge topic, whatever you want, let us know your ideas, and we will try to talk about them. Somebody, actually, Ryan, our good friend Ryan, mentioned something about the term fulfilled, and that we have a different understanding than my father on the word fulfilled. This is something that we'll have to talk about at a later time. I don't think that it's actually a difference of opinion. I don't, but I have to go back and listen to all the the clips that Ryan has mentioned. So yeah, that'll be a good one. Okay. Let's see here. So we talked about the the conference. I went to a conference. I was over in Moses Lake.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was first impressions when you walk into this place. Well done. The facility was very nice, full stage, I mean, they videotaped the whole thing with professional cameras, full soundboard, lights, backdrops on the stage. I mean, it was nice, and it was held at a church, and I can tell that it's been good. Anyway, so I walk in the exhibitors. I want to call it a corner. The exhibitors corner was there was 5 booths maybe, and when I say booth, I mean a table, and there was a little walkway. You could hit all it's like being in a small little kitchen where you can hit all counters just by turning.
Wow.
There were some interesting things in the other booths. I'll say that. Some of the books I saw were interesting at best. But I think the highlight for me was being able to connect with Shane, who is the leader of a congregation there in Moses Lake, and Shane and his wife and his family, and then my family went on Shabbat also the next day on Shabbat to their congregation, and that was fun. It was great. It was really nice to sit down and connect with people and see their community. It's always nice to go to other communities and see how people do things and how things are a bit different and whatnot. So we just had a blast. And then spared at no expense, both at the conference and at the Shabbat meeting. Food, I'm sure that we were probably supposed to bring something for the potluck on Shabbat. However, there was so much food. Yeah, there was no need. And of course,
wow.
in normal fashion of my family, we were, I think, first in line. Food's up? Yeah, we'll go first. We'll start out the line. No, we had elk. There was elk roast. It was fantastic. We just had we had a really good time. And then we make that trip next month as well. Less than three weeks now. We're just going to have a blast over there. I'm very excited. Adam and Mary from Montana are coming over to meet us in Coeur d'Alene, and Sam and Kelly from San Diego are flying up to meet us in Coeur d'Alene. Actually, I think I should say that we're meeting them. I think since they're I think they're coming the farthest and they're flying. So we're coming to see them in Coeur d'Alene. And then my new friend, Avi, met him in Colorado.
Hey, mine too, man.
He's coming up with he's got a tribe. He's bringing his 7 children and his wife. They're coming up, which is really
that's a road trip.
It's a road trip. And
when
not
I was
only
a kid, I was one of 6. And so we'd have my dad and my mom, 6 kids in a big station wagon with like a 1968 Pontiac station wagon. Then hooked behind that was the trailer. And I remember my little brother and I don't know if anybody's seen these kind of Pontiacs. It's the very back seat faces
out. Right.
Yeah. So my brother and I are watching. And one of the weirdest things is when another car's up there, you're just staring at him, right?
Especially when you come to a stoplight, right?
It's so awkward. You're just like... funny.
But
that's admirable, man.
The thing about Avi and his family, I've never met his wife. His wife has never met any of the people that she's going to be hanging out with for over half a week.
It's going to be like fire hose. Like,
my name is, yeah, exactly. And, all the intricacies of my family. And it's really interesting because everyone thinks, this light again is bothering my nose. Everyone thinks that because I'm outgoing and I'm a personable, I don't like silence in a group. So I tend to create conversation no matter what. A lot like on this show, right? You know, if there's silence, I try to fill it with saying something. So everyone thinks that I'm an extrovert, but I'm not. I'm an introvert. And my wife also is probably one of the most pleasant people to talk to and to have in a group of people because she's just so bubbly and kind and everything. Well, she's an introvert as well. We both recharge with silence and being alone, and our children are the same way. They're very outgoing, but we need our time, our downtime.
Sure.
So when we travel, and especially when we travel with other people, it's always interesting because people will be out doing stuff and we'll be like, all right, we'll see you in a couple hours. We're going back to hang out. And people are like, what are you doing? Nothing. So yeah, it'll be good though. I'm really excited. And we're going to Heart of Messiah on that Shabbat, which will be really fun.
Right.
And apparently I still have
Yes.
to present something now.
You got it.
Well, we have a couple of things to talk about. And so we decided, I cannot get this thing to work here. One of the things we decided we were going to do was a book review. And so Rob said, well, why don't you just talk about something that you've been reading or you've read recently that you've liked. And I'll talk about something that I've read recently that I've liked. I think that's a great idea. I love to read. I rarely have time to read, so my reading right now is very slow going. But it is what it is. Do you want to go first? Or do you want me to go first?
I'm happy to go first.
Go for it.
Let me find. I had some notes just to, believe it or not, Rob actually had notes for the show.
You're more prepared than I am because I did not have any notes.
I just got to make this bigger so I can read it. So I'm reading a book by I don't know that he's a professor of Catholic studies or something like that.
Okay.
His name's Paul J. Griffiths. This is the book.
Religious reading.
By
the way, I don't know. We decided that we weren't going to tell each other the books before we came on air.
Right,
I had nothing about this book.
So it's called Religious Reading, The Place of Reading in the Practice of Religion. And it's funny because you were just talking about time to read, right? This is 1999 Oxford University. And Paul Griffiths, it's Paul J. Griffiths. He taught at University of Chicago for many years. And then I think he's at a different school now, Duke maybe. And his specialization is like Catholic theology and then ancient Sanskrit Buddhism, like the texts of ancient Sanskrit.
Crazy.
And he does that as a comparative religion scholar. And I'm about maybe a third of the way into it, and then I've read core pieces from later on in the book. It's a dry read. It was recommended to me, and I'm glad I got it. I got a good deal online for it. But basically, this is what I'm taking so far. Now, again, I haven't finished the whole book, but he says there are basically two kinds of readers. There's consumerist reading, what he calls consumerist, and then there's religious reading. And they're completely different modes of interacting with a message.
Sure.
And so the purpose of the consumer reader is to you buy the book or you check out the book, you get the information you need, and then you toss the book. You don't need the book. You take it back to the library or you sell it or you give it to the Goodwill or whatever.
Right.
The book has no enduring value because you got what you needed from it. And often that is coupled with the production of more books. So and he uses academia as a way, okay, so I'll read 20 books on Paul's letter to the Romans, and I might only agree with half of what 3 of the books say, and the rest I don't like. But what I'm going to do is I'll scour through them. I'll pull the viewpoints from these guys that I'm going to argue against and dismiss, right? And so basically I'm dismissing all these scholars, right? So and then I produce another book. So I contribute to the consumer book industry as an author myself, having been a consumerist reader of this other material. Okay, so that's like one realm. The other realm is the religious purposeful reading.
Right.
And he says these cannot work together. The religious reading is it's a sacred book. You don't get rid of the book, right? The book has enduring value. You come to it again and again. You end up memorizing it, whether you try to memorize it and you work at memorization, or that just you spend so much time with the book that it's just in your heart. It's memorized. This also has to do with character formation, right? That you're using now remember, he's talking religion broadly, even though he's a scholar of Catholicism and Christian, and says he's Christian, but he's also a scholar of how ancient Buddhists use texts. And so that's how he does this compare. That there's a character formation in the relationship of the religious person with the sacred text. And so it helps them in their religion, right? So I like the basic idea, and there are some other little things I think that are helpful. But when I think about my own use of books, this model falls short for me. Because here's why. I have books all around me and in the other room now some of them, my wife always lets me know, you need to go through and get rid of some of your books.
The honey bucket guy is in the chat room again.
Oh, right on. Welcome.
Welcome. That's awesome. Keep going.
Forever. You've been forever branded, my friend.
He'll be known forever. Oh, hi. Nice to meet you. What do you do? I'm the honey bucket guy.
It's like, all right.
Sorry. Keep going.
So I'm surrounded by books. Caleb, you're surrounded by books. It's
right.
And then of course there's always books you can go through and say, okay, I need to cull my library. A lot of this stuff I don't need.
So, okay, hang on just a second. Let's pause right there, because this ties into something that was in the chat room. Somebody asked roughly how many books do we have. This is a loaded question, and the reason why is because I have duplicates of what my father has. A lot of duplicates. Now I do have about half my library is stuff that is not on my dad's shelf. My dad's library is about 6,000 theological books. He converted his garage into his library, and I think I've done some live video of me walking through the library. And now it's like this now. It wasn't always like this, but now the library separates my father and my desk. So we have to walk through the library to get to each other's desk, which is nice. It gives us a little bit of space. At home, I have about 600 books. Now, these aren't books that you just pick up and read, though. You know, I have, for instance, I have John Calvin's commentary on the entire Bible, and that's a huge work. I mean, it's volumes and volumes. I have Matthew Henry's.
That's at least 3 volumes.
No, I think it's 25 to 30 volumes. I have Matthew Henry's works on. I have the entire Kyle and Delitzsch commentary on the Old Testament. I have the entire Encyclopedia Judaica. So a lot of what I have at home are reference books that I have that I use if I'm studying at home, which doesn't happen very often. I normally study here at the office because the library is so much more vast. With that said, I just purged a significant portion of my library. And the reason why was because we moved things around. My wife finally allowed me to bring the books into the living room, they were always back in the back room. She didn't really like them, but we rearranged and she's pregnant, so that, you know, she's nesting, so everything has to be moved around. Well, moving 600 books is a feat in and of itself. But I had 2 full shelves on Judaism and Jewish mysticism. Now, I've written on Jewish mysticism before, and I've done 3 lectures in the Philippines on Jewish mysticism. And so these books at one time were a very large portion of what I was reading and what I was diving into. And I realized that I was out of room on my shelves. I'd filled all 3 bookshelves up with 600 books, roughly 600 books.
613.
I thought to myself, okay, what am I going to do? Obviously, I'm getting more books pretty much every month. I get at least a book or 2. My father will find really good books, reference books and whatnot that he already has, but he'll find them on like the dollar table at half price books. So what's $1 or $2, you know? So he'll pick up a couple of books, and then I'm always first in line. If, you know, basically I get first dibs on any books that he grabs. So basically, I thought, okay, I have to get rid of some books so that I can get new books. And so I just pulled off a significant portion of the 2 shelves of Jewish mysticism. I got rid of all of my books from Rabbi Nachman, which at one time I was very excited about, and now I look at them and think this is all just complete nonsense. And what I did, and this was difficult, what I did was I looked at my book collection on these 2 shelves and I said, what is actually going to benefit my spiritual life and help me grow in faith? And anything that
Right.
didn't instantly speak to me and say this, or what will I not need to reference in the next couple of years? And so I took a shelf and a half of books off of my shelf, and I have someone who gets first dibs on my books usually. If somebody in the office doesn't want them, then there's somebody that usually has first dibs, and then after that, whoever's around, I have a place where. But here's the thing: this is the other dilemma of getting rid of these books. Do I give them away? I mean, honestly, there are people who are into all things Jewish, and so they see something by Rabbi Nachman, who is is a staple writer within Judaism today, even though he died back hundreds of years ago, and they want to grab it just because they think they want to read through it, but it literally is just total and complete nonsense. There's if it's not beneficial, it's not beneficial at best. At worst, it's detrimental to someone who may be reading it.
So did you just throw those ones away? What'd you do?
They're still sitting in a box.
Oh, you haven't.
For the person who gets first dibs.
Yeah, there's books I own that I do not want to put back in circulation. For that saying, I don't want. I don't think other people should be reading.
Yeah, exactly. So,
and it's like, you know what? That's like my opinion, man.
I don't even have my soundboard open today. It's been a day. Okay,
So
keep going.
let me wrap
keep
up,
going.
Brian.
I'm sorry. Yes.
So we're surrounded by books, and I started thinking, I'm like, okay, if I look at my reading behavior, I can appreciate the idea of someone who's got a regular time and place, and like maybe early morning, they get a cup of coffee, the whole house is quiet, they turn on a little lamp, and they have their devotional time. Or maybe it's at nighttime, husband and wife, or maybe it's family, after dinner, whatever it is. And it's a daily or fairly, recurring, frequent routine of sitting, reading the word, and talking about it together. Okay, I would say that's religious reading.
Right.
And so I can understand that. But then I'm wondering what I haven't seen addressed in Griffith's book here is the idea, what about the translator? Which world is he in? Does he have one world? Let's say I'm a religious reader who's also a translator. So do I have one foot in the world of, let's say, the Hebrew text of Genesis, right? And that's where I'm like, I have you could say it's a devotional religious reading, right? But there's no English. I'm not I'm not translating it yet. I'm just, chewing on the text. And as part of a religious reading. But then it's like, I want to communicate this to English people who don't have access to the space that I'm in right now. So I translate it. And then I create basically a world in the English. So let's say you have someone who has a devotional time every day and they're reading through, let's say, the NASB. Okay. Their religious time with the word, of course, the Ruach, if you're born again, you have the Spirit and you can grow and you're in this world. But part of the reality is the language that, and all the decisions that there's millions probably of decisions that were made to produce that book and that specific translation that are off your radar. They're unseen decisions, unseen teams of people, and the business of the bookmaking is behind that. And so I can see how, and this is the nuance I'm not getting from this book. Like there's a differentiation of religious kinds of reading. I could read there. I mean, you could find someone who's a Mormon and they read the Book of Mormon, and you could say, yeah, they are religiously reading the Book of Mormon. You know, they do a devotional with it, sure. But they can inhabit that world their whole life and never have it pierced and never have it shown to be false. Right. And that's the issue that I'm concerned about with this book that I haven't gotten my head around yet. It seems that if we're going to divide different modes of reading, and here's another aspect to this, is that before the printing press, and Griffiths gets into this, in the ancient world, people's type of reading was through listening.
Right.
Right. I mean, like you'd go into the synagogue and someone would read the scriptures and everybody would listen. Most of the people, you know, might not even be able to read if they had the text in front of us, right, in front of them. So their exposure in most of human history, the Bible was received by the believers, not through direct reading of themselves, but from having a reader and then having it listening to it and taught. So their worshipful interaction with the Word of God was mediated through that person who did that. In our day, we can kind of become consumerists in our reading of the Bible. You just pick it up and you don't even have to sound out the words. You can just sit and just read with your eyes, and you never even have to bring the words out into the air.
Right.
And so I like that Griffiths is getting into this issue. He's kind of getting into the arena and trying to make sense of it, and he wants to separate consumerist reading from religious reading. I just think I need a better model because it doesn't exactly gel with my own experience.
Are you reading this book in tandem with your research for the paper you're doing in Israel, or is it totally separate? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and the reason why is because I'm trying to understand how different scholars, and don't get me wrong, Paul Griffiths is this is hard to read. I mean, this guy, like, I feel like the monkey in the back of the room. Like when I'm reading this, I have to go back and I have to read sentences over and over again. I have to mark it. Okay, this, you know.
So this isn't a book that you're telling listeners, hey, this is something you should go out and buy.
Yeah, I'm not saying it sucks. I'm just saying, and I'm not expecting people to go buy it. Yeah, oh, I'm just telling you about a book I'm reading, right? And
gotcha.
But yeah, I'm trying to get into the modes, what motivates. Okay, so there it is. So then we get to this. If I'm a religious reader, you know, most of the library of the world, it's like a huge chunk of it is commentaries on sacred scripture, whether it's Christian commentary on the Bible or Jewish commentary on the Tanakh, or even Muslim commentary on the Quran, right, Buddhist commentary. Like most of all this stuff is commentary, and the commentary, and this is something that Griffiths gets into. Commentary is the product, for the most part, of religious readers. In other words, they're interacting with the text. Caleb, you know this because you're writing on Acts right now. And then you have your purpose. What's the purpose of your commentary? Are you trying to teach something? Are you trying to argue something?
Right.
But that then is another product, right? Another religious product. Well, if I think of the Masoretic enterprise as a type of religious product, in other words, the book of the Mass, and scholars say, well, why did they do this? Were they trying to save Hebrew from the Arabic influence, or were they, trying to show off how well they knew the Tanakh? Were they trying to create a legal structure to protect future scribes from corrupting the text? There's all sorts of different reasons that people say that's why the Masoretes produced these books in the 10th century. And so I'm using Griffiths as just another way to think about it. Not that I'm going to, obviously, like I've said, I'm not that I buy or find everything he has to say helpful. So I'm kind of approaching his book from a consumerist kind of view, right, I guess. But, there's a lot of books I have that are scholarly, that are not Bible, they're not scripture, but I keep them because I value them, and I do return to them again, and I do pause and chew on the ideas, because they're authors and scholars that I respect and that I've gotten a lot of value from. But so in a way, that's where another place where it seems like Griffith's model breaks down. It seems like there would be just academic books that he might think I read religiously because I ponder them. I'm kind of meditating on it in a way, not that I'm not taking it as scripture, but that I'm trying to understand an idea that is helpful in my own development. So anyway, I feel like I've been talking forever on this.
Okay, I went in a totally different direction with the book that I chose. Normally, like Rob, I'm reading things for whatever I'm studying. So currently, I'm I'm going back and forth between 3 commentaries on the Book of Acts because I'm writing on Acts. So that's my headspace is very much in there. However, I always have another book or 2 that I'm reading as well. A lot of the time what will happen is I'll pick books up, I'll get halfway through or 3/4 of the way through and I won't finish them for one reason or another. I'll lose interest. A lot of the time I just lose interest by the end. I feel like I've gotten the gist of what someone's saying and so I'm just done. And I think one of the reasons that is because a lot of what I read is in fact scholarly. So it's not something that the average person picks up and looks at and says, "Oh, this looks great. I'm going to read, this thing on, I don't know, this in-depth look at Philippians 2 or, something like that." But those are the kind of books that I'm constantly reading, and when I want a break from things, this is no joke. Probably about 6 months ago, I thought, man, I've been reading such heady stuff and things that are so specific. I was reading a rundown of Codex Bezae, which was fascinating, but just super in the weeds for anyone who, isn't into that kind of thing. And so I thought, well, I need a break. I need something that's not as heady. So I picked up N.T. Wright's 2-volume commentary on Paul, which is, I don't know how many pages it is. I think it's maybe 1,500 pages. And once again, it's heady, but it's right. So it's not like that specific study. So with all of that said, several weeks ago, my family was at a church that we frequent on a regular basis, and the teaching is just fantastic. And one of the pastors got up and said, "We have a couple of books on the back table. If you have, a couple bucks, put it in there. But if you don't, just take them because we think they're really good books. And so we want you to have them." And I thought, a lot of the time when churches give away books like that, I'm like, what is this going to be? Surface level, very, fluff is kind of what I think when I think of a church giving away a book, because the book ultimately has to reach people on every level, right? The brand new believer, they have to be able to read it as well. But I went back and I asked, okay, what book do you, because I didn't have any money. And so I said to the person back at the table, I said, "Look, I don't have any money. What book out of the 2 do you think would be the best?" And he handed me the book I'm about to show you. And then I looked at it and I thought, this does not look good at all. I thought, "Oy vey, what kind of a read is this going to be?" And so I went back to the table and I said, "I'm actually going to take the other one." And he said, "I'll tell you what, you just take both of them.
Oh, wow.
And if at some point you want to put a couple bucks in the offering plate, that's fine, but just consider it a gift." I said, okay. So I went home. I took the initial book that he had given me, the one that I wanted to take back. I sat down on that Sunday. This is maybe 2 weeks ago. I sat down on that Sunday. I opened it up. I thought to myself, you know what? I'll read 1 or 2 pages and just kind of get a flavor for the author. I couldn't put it down. It was probably one of the best non-theological books I've ever read in my life. It's a new book. It's by Rosaria Butterfield, and it's called "The Gospel Comes with a House Key." And basically, it's all about practicing radically ordinary hospitality in our post-Christian world. She is just a fascinating person to read about. She grew up she grew into the LGBT community. She was a leading advocate for gay and lesbian rights in New York in the 90s. She was a lesbian herself and was living with her partner, and she was a professor at Syracuse in New York. an English professor, which is one reason I think she is such a fantastic writer. And she was helping. She was a champion in the gay and lesbian community. She was actually helping write bills for equal rights, and she decided that she was going to do a book on how Christianity was wrong, essentially. And she told all of her students that you can't critique a book unless you read the book. And so she had written a piece in a newspaper, and a pastor had written to her about the piece in the newspaper and said, I would like to talk to you about it. Well, she kept coming back to it and coming back to it and coming back to it. And finally she thought, I should get a hold of this guy. She started going to his house, him and his wife's house on Sunday nights, and having dinner with them. And this pastor would open his home up to anyone and everyone who wanted to come and eat at their house. And so through that, she came to start going to church with them, and eventually came to Christ and left the LGBT community, married her now husband, who is a pastor of a very conservative Presbyterian church. And this book is actually not about her coming to Christ. She wrote that in a different book. This book is actually about her and her husband's outreach in their community. And
but using the same
she tells a lot about her
strategy.
story. Yeah, she tells a lot about her story, and then the way that she writes, once again, it's just I can tell that she's a professional writer. She'll start a section with Monday, February 28th, 2008. And then she'll dive into the story. But then she leaves these stories. You want it to resolve. You want to know what happened, and she never tells you, which is brilliant, because there's this sense of, I want to know more throughout the entire book. And so basically her point is, and I'm not saying that I agree with the entire book, but her point is that when we open our homes to our neighbors and to our community around us, not rolling our eyes, not judging people who are going to come to dinner, but opening our homes and letting our homes be a jump point for believers and non-believers alike. And we don't try to judge people or smash people over the head with the Bible, but live our faith and live it openly and fully in front of people, being the conservative Christian or whatever it is that, opens their home to anyone and everyone. This speaks the gospel to people in mighty ways. That's the thrust of the book. And honestly, I can't. I think some people will take issue with the book, honestly, but just for the writing style alone, she's such a good writer. And, I know that she probably was writing with a female audience in mind, maybe not. But she really is cross denomination and cross audience. I think that her book really spoke to me in many ways, and I'm sure it would speak to my wife in different ways. But what she said, she talks about a lot of different aspects of life. She has stories about her mother, who was an atheist until 2 days before she died. And her mother living with them for 13 months or 16 months, and how hard that was for them. She talks about church discipline and having to bring church discipline on people in the church. She talks about her next door neighbor, who she calls Hank, but I know that his name was different. But him and his girlfriend had a house in their neighborhood, $450,000 house, and he got busted for having a meth lab. And so the fallout that came with the neighbors because they were essentially inviting this guy into their home and whatnot, and having meals with him. And so the idea of what the neighbors thought when he got busted with a meth lab, and how they continue to visit him in prison. And it's just the whole book all around is and I will say the name of it again for the people in the chat room who are asking. It's called The Gospel Comes with a House Key. It's by Rosaria Butterfield. And I can't say enough good things about it. And I just picked up the other book that the church was giving away, because I'm pretty much done with this. I'm in the conclusion. But I picked up the other book while we were in Moses Lake, And it's a little bit more, I see exactly what he's doing. I've wanted to write the exact same book. But his introduction to the gospel in the first 2 or 3 chapters, just unbelievable. And actually, he's a pastor here in Bellevue, which is about, 30 minutes away from me?
Cool.
30, 40 minutes. So, yeah. But I think that no matter if you agree or disagree with Butterfield's conclusion on Christian hospitality, which I tend to agree with, for the most part, whether you agree or disagree, I think that her book is worthy of reading. It's definitely not scholarly, but you can get it online for a very. It's inexpensive, and it's not scholarly at all. You don't need any Hebrew, any Greek. She uses endnotes, which is one of my pet peeves.
Oh, because you have to flip to the back.
You have to flip to the back, and I think the endnote should be eradicated from publications. However, that being said, she knows her audience well enough to know that her audience isn't going to be footnote heavy, and so there's not a whole lot of endnotes in and of themselves, which is fine. The kind of book that it is, she doesn't need that. But she does reference a couple of things that I found to be very interesting. Her and her family sing the Psalms, and so she references a psalter that they use, which I now have looked at and am looking to purchase. Actually, another book that I need to purchase. This is totally off subject, but thanks a lot, Rob, for this. Rob sends me a link, and it's the group that I was at the SBL. The main group that I was listening to is Meals in the Greco-Roman World. A collective group of authors from that group at the SBL have put together a book. 130 pounds. That's like $160.
Yeah.
I have to get it. It's called Meals in the Greco-Roman World. I mean, so I know what I'm saving up my shekels for that one. Okay, we got about 13, 14, 15 minutes, something like that. You want to talk about Romans 14?
Well, I think we just touched. Did we touch on it last week just a little bit?
I don't even know if we touched on it.
We didn't get to it.
I think we mentioned the chapter.
Romans 14 is one of those verses that people will cite, right? Oh, you can eat whatever you want because of Romans 14, right? Or if Mark 7 didn't get it. And so I thought, and someone had asked us about Romans 14. And so I thought I would just give a super trimmed down, version of how I understand this passage, particularly 14:1 through verse 23.
That's the whole of 14. 1 through 23 is the entire chapter.
No, I think it's more than that, isn't it?
Nope, I don't think so. I'll look.
Oh no, you're right.
So particularly the whole chapter.
So the bookends, in my view, are actually coincide nicely with the numbering there. But what you don't want to do is read like the King James in Romans 14. And the reason why, unless you're wise up to their, they were limited in their manuscripts. They didn't have a whole bunch of available manuscripts. And so one of the places where it, where is it? Is it verse 5 and 6? Or no, verse 6. Verse 6 is bigger in, is it verse 6? Oh, sorry.
You can tell that we're really prepared for this conversation.
Anyway, I think there's a verse in there where it adds.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
We've talked about this on the show before.
Yeah. So like the NASB said in verse 6, he who observes the day observes it to the Lord. He who eats does so for the Lord and gives thanks. The King James follows this, this, whatever we call it, the received, the Textus Receptus. And it says, he who regards the day regardeth it unto the Lord. He that regardeth not the day to the Lord, he doth not regard it. They added this extra bit. No ancient manuscripts have this. And it's just, so this is one of those places where they added. But the bookend then is verse 1 and verse 23. And it has to do with a person who is not living by faith, but is doubting. And the language of the doubting is contrasted by faith in the Gospels and elsewhere in the apostolic writings. Like when Yeshua says, if you have faith, but you don't doubt in your heart, right? So these are contrasted. And there's, or he'll ask, why do you doubt in your heart, right? In other words, it has to do with someone who is not, they're not living fully out of faith. They're sitting there, judging within themselves and usually judging other people.
Right.
And like for one of the examples would be where they're going to watch Yeshua to see if he breaks the Sabbath and they're going to pounce on him, right? It's that kind of thing. So what Paul's talking about in Romans 14:1 is that if someone comes in and says they're weak in the faith, that they're welcome. However, not to give space for, in the NASB says, passing judgment on opinions. And it's weird. I don't like the NASB. It says passing judgment on his opinions. The genitive there is not in the Greek. That's interpretive. It means this meal time, this fellowship time, is not a time for people to get in arguments or judge each other for what they're eating. So while he does talk about observance of days in here, that's only secondary to this main topic, which is meal time. And the best way, I think, to make to explain what's going on here in Romans 14 is if you just imagine you have a meal and you've got nice fruits and veggies, and then you have some sort of meat. Now, there's no reason to presume that there would be pork on this table. So now some might argue, well, there's probably pork on the table, Well, that would be it. We can have that discussion also, but I'm going to assume right now that we can just all agree this is an inter-Jewish problem, and then Gentiles come, and the presence of the Gentiles does not change the fundamental nature of the problem. The fundamental nature of the problem is under the line of like Romans or Matthew 15. You didn't wash your hands,
right? Or
everybody else is fasting and you're not fasting. We're talking about that kind of thing. And so there's meat there and there's vegetables. Okay, so and assume that this is a fellowship, right? So the hosts and the general overall tone of this gathering is one of believers. Even though there might be some people who are willing to be there, but they're not really sure, if they're in or not, right? But they're there and they feel welcome. Okay, so that's the scenario, in my view, is going to get you the proper understanding of this. And what would happen, though, and this is what Paul is trying to teach the Romans about, is his understanding and his approach to this it's kind of like what we, in rabbinic terms, a halakhic issue.
Right.
You have some people come and let's say they're not normally there. They come, this is somebody else's house. They've never been in this house. They see all this food and they see the meat there. So the issue is not that it's pork. The issue is that it's meat, but they don't know. Well, maybe was it offered to idols? I don't know. So what they're going to do is they'll go through the table and they're just going to eat vegetables, right? And there's going to be another guy in line behind him, and he's going to get a big old piece of the meat on his plate, right? I'm just imagining this. What Paul's saying is
kind of like me at Shabbat, this last Shabbat, just scooping elk roast on
Caleb, yeah. So Paul's saying this is a classic. That's the setup, and this is a classic scenario for an argument on traditions of men, and how communities then can divide over traditions of men, because one guy's going to say, I can eat this meat. The other person say, no, you shouldn't eat that meat. And they could judge each other wrongly, but they can set themselves up as judges of each other with respect to their attitude. And what Paul says is that if it gets to that you can't receive people, you can't welcome people in if that's their go-to. If they're going to be people and they're going to, that's the person that's going to go to the line and they're going to start saying, hey, I can't believe you guys have this meat here. Like, who's eating that? Oh, you're eating that? That's Paul's saying you have to, those people can't even, are not even in.
Somebody in the chat room just said, wow, it sounds like such a modern problem. Yeah, it sounds like every Hebrew roots and Messianic congregation that I've ever been to.
Well,
except for the last
we know
one
that
on
Yeshua,
Shabbat, right?
I mean, it was the same thing, like with the washing of the hands and all these kind of things. Washing the hands, fasting. Did you immerse before you eat? These sort of things. Okay, so did you say a blessing, right, before you ate that orange or apple, right? And so these sorts of things were issues. So what Paul's getting in here is that core issue. And he goes on and I'm going to skim through just for sake of time.
He talks about the same thing in 1 Corinthians.
Right. Well, here he doesn't talk about idols, though. That's why I don't know that the general legal or halakhic, if we use that term anachronistically, angle that Paul's taken here doesn't matter whether a meat sacrificed to idol it has been thrown into the air or not. It could just be improperly slaughtered, right? Or it's suspicious, right? A Gentile slaughtered it, maybe, right? So it's suspicious for some reason, not necessarily because it's was offered to idols or because it was like pork or something. But basically, if you go down to 13, he says we're not to put a stumbling block in front of another's. Right. But then he says in 14, I'm convinced in Lord Yeshua that nothing is, now it shouldn't say unclean here. It just says koinos in itself. But to him who calls it koinos, koinos.
Wait. You got to describe that word to people.
Yeah. Well, I will. But my point is that unclean makes you think, this is back to that religious reading. The devoted Christian reader here is going to read unclean and they're going to think, oh, that's unclean like Leviticus 11. And, oh, nothing's unclean in and of itself. Oh, but to him it's unclean. Oh, so Jesus did away with the food laws. And now, and see, that's where they go. And that's part of their religious world now that they inhabit. And that's our challenge, is to say, wait a minute, I love you dearly, but that's not what the scriptures are saying. And the translators here have done us a disservice.
You still haven't described koinos, yeah.
Long story short, koinos here, as it's used elsewhere, is an innovated term. This is a recent term in the first century. It's not used in the Greek of the Tanakh at all. It's and it's a tradition of it's like a not just a kosher stamp, but it's a certain brand of unkosher. It's like instead of a kosher stamp, right. It's an unkosher. Like, let's say you have the circle, the U with the circle on it, Orthodox Union. You could have like it's a circle with a slash through it.
Right.
So it would be like unacceptable.
Man-made unacceptable though.
Yeah, but it's man-made,
right.
And it has currency. People they think that this is a real thing, right?
Touched by a Gentile,
we
koinos.
can't. Paul, just like Yeshua in the Gospels, is saying the same thing. It is on us to discern between the tradition of men and the Word of God, and it's not self-evident in our lives where that line is, and we have to search a matter out.
Right.
So, what this. That nothing has been stamped in and of itself as this. This is, in other words, this is a man-made thing. To the person who considers it, to him it's that. So that means the guy who's got his little mental avoid stamp and he just goes boonk. Well, to him, he put the label on there. To him, he considers that off limits. Right. It could be a nice piece of beef, but he just has some reason. Oh, well, I know the guy who did it, and he's suspicious. So
the koshering facility, the people who koshered it aren't as stringent as this group over here. So we're going to.
And this is not surprising if you look at all the differing kosher certifications in even Orthodox world. right? Was it slaughtered properly, right? And that's where you get into the Jewish mysticism again with the reincarnation. Did you let the nefesh? Otherwise, you might be consuming the nefesh of an Israelite, right? I mean, that's the Lurianic Kabbalah, is that if you eat meat that has an unstrict kosher standard, and it has blood in it, you could actually be consuming the reincarnated nefesh of. It sounds weird, but it's, that's the deal. But obviously, we don't have evidence of that in the first century being a concern. But so then he goes here, and he goes on, and he keeps talking about how to navigate this, right? How to navigate this. We are to pursue things which make for peace and building up each other. And then he says, all things indeed are clean, but they are evil for the man who eats and gives offense. Okay. This is an important verse that I don't like the way it's translated. What is saying here, where this is Romans 14 verse 20, but it's the second half of the sentence. The pantamen kathara just means all the things on this table that we were just talking about, all the things that were available to eat are kathara. And that's the word. That's the Bible word. Are pure, are clean. Not spiders are, it doesn't mean spiders are clean. It doesn't mean frogs are now clean, right? It doesn't mean you can eat a horse. That's not what this means. It just means it's talking about the meal that you're at and the people have put on this food. He's saying all the food is pure, but for the person who is wrapped up in this hostility to what other people are eating and what they're eating, like because of what's here in the meal, to them it's evil.
Right.
So the purity of that food doesn't help them. In other words, let's say I'm that guy, okay? And Caleb, I just met you. You're practicing this new book, right? And you have this big food, and you've got vegetables, you've got fish, and you've got some elk there, okay? And I come, and let's say I've been immersed in these Rabbi Nachman books, right? Or whatever. And I'm like, okay. And I'm just kind of checking people out. And then I start making a stink about the food, right? Well, Paul's point here is it doesn't matter. The purity of the food on the table does not help me in my relationship to God.
So I think
I'm going to eat it, and I might think, well, I'm only going to eat these vegetables because the vegetables are the only thing I know are pure. But if I'm making a stink about the other stuff, me eating just the vegetables does not commend me before God. I still got this grumbly, judgmental, arrogant attitude that's stinking up my heart and the whole room probably.
But I think that it goes further than that. So, for instance, when I was over in Moses Lake this last weekend, one of the brothers that I met there, wonderful to talk to him. He was raised, and his brothers are still serving in the fundamentalist Baptist denomination, which is where like Stephen Anderson comes from. So Stephen Anderson, KJV only. If you drink any alcohol, you're not one of us. And Jesus didn't drink alcohol; he drank grape juice. These are the fundamentalist Baptist beliefs. And he was talking about how his brothers kind of point to the Hebrew roots and Messianic movement, and you got people who are drinking wine and beer, and it's kind of like, see, these guys aren't. And so, I think of the idea of somebody comes into my house, if I serve beer and they're going to be, if I have beer there and they're going to be offended by that, then what's better to do? To say, well, get over it, or we don't hold those beliefs, or to just pull the beer and say, let's have grape juice tonight, or, something like that. So I think this is what Paul's looking at it from both. He's kind of coming at it from both points of view. He's coming at it from the person who's there and saying, don't worry about what they're serving. But at the same time, he's saying, don't, if this person's going to be offended by it, pull it. Who cares? You
Right.
know,
No, that's a good point. And I again, each verse needs to be
just go
attended
straight to the
here.
dessert. Exactly. Straight to the dessert.
And then at the very end here in chapter 14 to 23, he who doubts is condemned if he eats, because his eating is not from faith. So the doubter there, this takes us back to verse 1, to the diachronomos, right? Diachronomenos, right? That's the same word that we see in a diakrisis right there in verse 1. So there's the idea of the person who comes to the meal, and then there's a way to have a shalom in the meal. But if there's a person who's bound and determined to find fault in all this stuff, that doesn't help them before God. They might imagine, oh, I'm being godly, you know. Now, so then you say, okay, well, let's say there's pig on the table. Well, I don't think Paul's imagining at all. He's talking about foods that are pure, right? Food. It's so funny. And then that gets us back to because we're the readers in particularly in America, English evangelical circles are absolutely imagining ham on the table.
Right, of course.
And that's an anachronism, right? I mean, the verse that no one has is in the Bible, even in these added versions like the King James with the Textus Receptus. There is no verse that says, and they all sat down and ate a barbecue pork. We just don't. There's no evidence whatsoever from the apostolic writings. There's no evidence that Yeshua or any of his disciples ever ate any biblically unclean food. There's no evidence, just as there's no evidence that Noah ever did, which kind of takes us back to last week. We just don't have any evidence of that. And so to push that and get people to thinking that it is was quite an accomplishment that people actually believe that now, but it's not in the scripture.
I want to make sure that I said this right. The book that I was talking about, The Gospel Comes with a House Key, is by Rosaria Butterfield. Did I say Rosaria or did I say Gloria?
I just remember Butterfield.
Yeah, it's by Rosaria Butterfield. Anyway, for the people who have been looking for it, you can find it on christianbooks.com, has it for $9.99, and Amazon has it for $14.99. Okay, well, it's been a fun conversation. We've had right around 36 listeners the whole time.
Wow, right on.
Perfect. Yeah, so we hope that you've enjoyed it. And we do really want you to send us emails with ideas and show topics and all that kind of stuff. And you can do that by sending it to, hang on just a second. Let me see here. That's the comment line, 253-465-3205, 253-465-3205. And then chag@torahresource.com. It's chag@torahresource.com. Next week is going to be in the Purim, during the Purim week. So if you have questions about Purim, if you have questions about or comments about the book of Esther or something that you find interesting or whatever it may be, send them to us, because next week maybe we'll do something on Purim. That'd be fun, I think. All right, we hope this conversation has done one thing, and that is to glorify our great God and Savior, Yeshua, the Messiah. Why? Because Messiah matters.